We've got Elizabeth Henry first up today on the TIPE track industry. Elizabeth is going to be sharing with us additive manufacturing in the hands of artists and large-scale works to small batch production. So Elizabeth Henry is the principal founder of Henry General Strategies, HGS, and they are a consulting firm that focuses on aligning business opportunities at the intersection of industry, government, and academia. Henry founded HGS in 2022 after serving for more than 5 years as a subject matter expert in additive manufacturing for the United States Office of Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering's Office of Manufacturing Technology. Henry consults, writes, and speaks on innovation, collaboration, and emerging markets in new technologies, including additive manufacturing. So I'm going to invite Liz to the screen, and then we will go from there. Excellent. Okay. Hang on, sorry, I'm having a share. Please excuse me. Excellent. Excellent. Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hey, not bad. How are you guys?
Good, good. All right. Did you hear my introduction before?
I did.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm a little bit weird. My brain's working too fast for my mouth today, so I do apologize. So yeah, please, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Trish, and thank you so much for moderating this track on the industry panel. I am going to get some documents up and going. I'm going to do this. I'm going to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds, everyone. And let's try this. Let me know if this comes across. Oh, that doesn't look quite right. Give me 2 seconds, everyone.
Yes, we've got that now, Liz.
I'm going to do this document then. All right, so Trish gave me this wonderful introduction for this talk we're doing today. And you know what? We're going to be a little, I'm just going to give you some pretty pictures here. We'll start with this one. First of all, what I would absolutely love to do for everybody on here, there are a ton of participants here from all over the world. One thing that I love to talk about is additive manufacturing and really creative approaches to it, uses of it. And I would love if we use the chat today for the next 25 minutes to share some links of really interesting things that we have either made ourselves or seen around, so that everyone else here can see them, because you're here because you love to share this kind of thing. And that's what this kind of event is all about. So I would just encourage you, either feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, but please also feel free to fill the chat with links to any of your most creative, most interesting, most shareable additive manufacturing objects, sculptures, ideas. And I would just love for everyone to do that. Thank you. So yeah, as Trish said, I did work at the U.S. Department of Defense from 2017 to 2022 as a contractor. I am an SME in additive, and I run a management consulting firm, the intersection of industry, academia, and government. And I love what I do. I just started this about 7-8 months ago, and I am actually in DC right now. Washington, D.C. right now. And while I focus on government business development and helping industry better engage with, all the different federal agencies, I'm going to let you all in on a little bit of a secret. I'm not an engineer. I'm actually I actually studied linguistics and I studied art. And I know that's pretty weird, but not in this industry. And what's kind of wonderful about this industry is you find a lot of people who've studied a lot of very creative, very interesting, just very different things, and kind of all came to additive in a really unique place. And I felt really, really at home here in the additive industry, and frankly, with a lot of emerging tech industries, because, industries that are still forming, that haven't really figured out exactly how they're going to grow as quickly as they'd like to grow. And I've often felt that this is just it's a very creative time. I think there are a lot of organizations who are trying to figure out exactly how to scale, exactly how to figure out how to get through the standards, qualifications, and certifications, how to make things move faster, how to make things really catch. And that is everything from materials to processes to applications. Now, I am in Washington, D.C. this week, and so I actually have a really interesting building that I'd like to show you, and I'd like to know if anyone knows what it is. This is relevant, I promise. Is this building familiar to anybody on the... Yes, thank you. And does anyone know what this building is? It is in Washington, D.C. It is the Smithsonian. Specifically, what building of the Smithsonian? Does anyone know what specifically this is called? On the National Mall. Yes, it's a Futures building. It is also specifically called the... You guys are really close. I'm sure a number of people have come to visit. It's a wonderful place to visit on the National Mall, should you decide to be in DC. It's actually called the Arts and Industries Building. But it is a fantastic, fantastic building. And they've recently, I think last week, they closed a Futures show, where they recently had a really interesting one. But great catch, Meredith. Yes, this is the Arts and Industries Building. And I wanted to highlight this because the arts and the industries have such a tangled and long history. There's such a fascinating history here. Yes, exactly. I can try to make my screen bigger. Let me see what I can do. I can also make this available later. I'd be very happy to share. Thank you so much. Yes, so the Arts and Industries Building, it is part of the Smithsonian. And what is so interesting about anytime you talk about the industrialization of the arts, or arts and craft, and the word art is actually really interesting. If you look at the word art in a lot of different languages, it actually means like the way you do something, or the manner in which you do something, or how you do something. And so when you start to think about the arts and industries, you start to realize that there really is a lot of experimentation, exploration, imagination, creation. Anytime you have technologies and, well, arts or handcrafts or whatever else you want to call it, essentially the many different ways you can, well, in our world, make things, right? We're talking about manufacturing, additive manufacturing. And a lot of the ideas that are, I guess, let's just say symbolized with a building like the Arts and Industries Building in the Smithsonian in DC, there's this idea of an incubator, there's this idea of a convergence of a lot of different disciplines, ideas, industries, people, and they're all kind of coming together almost in a laboratory sense. And, this is... When I think about this building, I think about true interdisciplinary work. And, a lot of this is thinking about the future. There's almost always a future posture here, right? So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is this one. Anyone familiar with the World's Fair, just in a general sense? I feel my grandmother actually went to the one in Chicago when she was a kid, and she told me all about how she was fascinated by the kitchen of tomorrow. Yes, exactly. There's always this future posture, and they try to introduce, usually the World's Fair in Chicago in the U.S. in 1933, they wanted to talk about the century of what did they call it? Of progress. And they wanted to talk about, this is what all of the households are going to have in the next 100 years, this and that. when I think about arts and industries, there is an element of commercialization, there's an element of industrialization, there is an element of manufacturing, and there's a scalability element to all of this. But there's also this future element, sort of in this idea of the World's Fair. What is it that we are building right now for the future? And this is just, it's a lot like additive manufacturing. We have all these neat new materials and processes. We're really on the cusp of a lot of new and emerging industries right now. We're reimagining how we're thinking about a lot of products that have been around for a long time, designs that have been around for a long time, and we're leveraging new technologies to see how can we do this differently? How can we leverage all this neat new stuff? All right, now I'm going to take a step back from the big picture of arts and industries and the future posture of the World's Fair and thinking about where we want to go with all this neat new stuff, and talk about this really neat thing. This really neat thing is actually an article that I wrote for Metal AM magazine publication, if you're not familiar. This was, thank you, and people are sharing some lovely, some really interesting things that I will look at later, but please keep on sharing them and everyone keep on enjoying that in the chat as we move on. Metal AM magazine is a trade publication that I was very fortunate to be able to write an article for on the power of additive manufacturing, very much similar to this, in the October issue of 2022. And I'm going to tell you a lovely, very short story about how all of this came to be. If anyone's familiar with AMUG, the Additive Manufacturing Users Group, which is a little US focused, but it meets in Chicago every year. And last May, during this random lunch where they have everyone pick a number and you go to a table where you don't know anybody and they just really mix everything up, I ended up sitting next to this lovely gentleman by the name of Nick Williams. And he happens to be the publisher of Metal AM magazine, and he was the one who really pushed me in the direction to say, let's talk about this. There is something here at this intersection of art, technology, and business development. Excuse me. And we talked about the appeal of emerging technology spaces to creative types. And by creative types, I am not just talking about artists. I'm talking about research and development engineers. I'm talking about scientists. I'm talking about artists. I am not discriminating. We're talking about the stuff, the material, like that all these different people like to mess around with, and the new materials. Talking about designers as well. But I'm also talking about the process through which you learn about this stuff. And I was thinking, we were really talking about like designers and artists and architects and engineers and scientists were really kind of all going through a similar process here. Each individual, each profession, through their own processes, through their own ways, is really going through a very similar process with materials. And with the materials, there's an element of sort of conceiving, like conceptualizing, planning, building, testing, something that is new, novel, or untested. And then you have to go through this process, which can sometimes be very frustrating and time-consuming, that involves moving towards an understanding of something, whether it's through trial and error, however it is you learn and document, working towards a goal, trying to make something. And we really had this lovely conversation, Nick and I, about how there's so much commonality between all of this and how there really is, there's just such a wonderful spirit within the additive manufacturing community that really encapsulates a lot of this. Okay, so let's look at some fun stuff, shall we? And please keep on sharing some neat things. Okay, so anyone know who this is? Person. Well, it's a representation of a person. This is a sculpture. Oh, I love everything that people are throwing into the chat. This is wonderful. This is a sculpture by a Swiss-Italian art sculptor from the, I think, early 20th century. Anyone familiar with this particular artist? We're going to talk about his process in just a second. Giacometti, yes, exactly. And this particular sculpture, thank you. Yes, this particular sculpture is called Walking Man, and it is a very, very famous one. If you go to a contemporary art museum or a 20th century art museum, you will see usually a few of these around. Now, does anyone remember what makes this particular sculpture, his style of sculpture, so interesting? You have these very long, very almost twiggy humans usually. in this moving forward leaning stance. Anyone remember anything about this particular artist? They were cast bronze, yes. They were, yes, it is extremely hard to do really thin castings. This is something that comes up at, in defense situations all the time and in industrial situations. It's extremely difficult to do really thin cast bronze. And so what Giacometti was obsessed with, and I don't think that's an overused term or an exaggerated term, he was really trying to make the thinnest possible limbs for these characters, and nobody's entirely sure why. He had a whole bunch of explanations for exactly why he wanted to do it, but he was really yes, and he was really and some of them are smaller. These are some of the bigger ones. He was trying to make them just thin enough so they wouldn't break under their own weight. What a fascinating idea, especially for what we're doing here in additive manufacturing, when you're always trying to do these really thin walls or really thin structures. So this is just he was doing plaster casts that he had cast, plaster sculptures that he then had cast in bronze. And I just wanted to include these pictures because I just felt what a fascinating approach to this. And I think we kind of all resonate with this if we've spent some time. Here's a completely different artist that I want to share with you, talking about plaster, talking about castings. This is Benjamin Dillenberger. He's coincidentally also a Swiss artist, but this is a massive scale. I don't know if you can see the structures in the back there, but this is one of his pieces was also in the Metal AM magazine article. And what he's doing is he's actually using, I think, a binder jetting process to build what looks like a remixed, what do you call it, architectural facade in a way. And I just wanted to share this because it is massive and regal in a very different kind of way. It also reminded me, and there's some, I'll include some links later, but this is of a massive scale. I think a few of these have been installed in like city blocks in Toronto, for instance. Now I want to show you something else that this actually made me think of when I saw it first. If anyone's familiar with, this is a picture of my local museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Carnegie Museum of Art has this collection of, yes, thank you. The Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh has a collection of casts, architectural casts that they made of essentially mostly antiquities and European antiquities and church facades, columns, a lot of these really interesting old world architectural elements that were important for students to study who might not have the chance to travel. And they kept these in a very similar way. They're also very large. And I wanted to share, I felt like there was a real similarity between some of the larger pieces that were coming out of, additive in bronze right now, in plaster right now, and now some of these much bigger ones. Let's look at some more stuff. Here's another one by the same artist. I think it is an opera, what do you call it, scene decoration. It is, you can't do this level of design without the kind of software that we have, and you can't do this level of manufacture without the neat new kinds of technologies that are kind of coming out right now. Same artist, Dillenberger. Let's move on to some neat new stuff. Here's another one that came out of the FIT AG. I don't remember the name of the artist right now, but it's also in the article. This is in Germany, I think, and there's some very interesting representation here, but here they actually highlight the printing itself in the art piece. So it's not just the piece, the stuff that it's printed, but it's also the process of printing. And as far as I understand about this piece, it's an in motion, in progress kind of situation. And I believe that there's an illustration element to this one where they're actually talking about the different levels or the different layers actually match to different geographic layers in a particular space. Here's another interesting one, completely different, out of left field. There's an architectural firm called that was started by Zaha Hadid, And these are all conceptual pieces. They're all, they look a lot like monuments, right? They're model skyscrapers in a way. Somebody told me they looked like cake toppers once, but they really are very futuristic when we think back to, what is it that we're doing with this World's Fair ideology and this sort of merging of industries and arts and industries. I came across, some of these skyscrapers designs that were very futuristic in style and form. And I feel like, if any of us were to walk through a downtown and see something like this, it would really be something different. And I haven't spent a lot of time in the Middle East, but I hear that there are some really different kinds, and in Asia, some very different kinds of skylines really emerging that I think are largely inspired by our industry and by the technology that we all get to play with every day. This piece, the picture doesn't do it justice. It's massive and it's hanging, and it is a wire. I think this is from the MX3D company. The artist is from Brooklyn, and she came up with this very, it feels very light, but I'm sure it's really, really heavy. This incredible piece that is hanging, and these are public artworks, right? You'll see these when you travel, when you go through the airport, you'll see a whole bunch of really neat new pieces that a lot of artists are starting to leverage technologies in our industry to make. As soon as they can trust these technologies, as soon as they can start to say, like, all right, what can I do with that? We'll start to see more pieces like this all around. And I'll send some links around later on this one too. I think the MX3D site has a bunch of them. So I'm going to wrap this up and then open it up to some questions. But here's one more really large sculpture that I wanted to share. And this is actually, this is at MIT at the McGovern Center for Brain Research. And in the upper left-hand corner, it's so tiny, I'm sorry here. These are actually, they look like neurons with dendrites that are kind of reaching out, and they're actually all 3D printed. They're in steel bronze matrix, and they are all suspended from the ceiling in a way such that if you look at it the right way, it actually looks like the human brain. And these are just some really interesting pieces that they aren't, it isn't a fuel nozzle, it isn't a bracket, but these are all elements that are so in very different ways. And I am a total fan for seeing a lot more uses of our technology out in perhaps less technical uses as well. So what am I going to finish up by saying? I'm going to leave you guys with this one right here and say we've got the really big, we've got the really small. How do you get from the bracket on the left to the bracket on the right? You have to, it's not a complete straight line. It's not necessarily always logical. There's always going to be some kind of convergence of ideas and pushing, let's just say, pushing the limits a little bit too far, a little bit differently to get to there. You have to have some impetus for it. And I'll talk about the bottle opener on the right. Does anyone recognize where this one is from or who did this one? It is a bottle opener. And it is made of steel. It doesn't have to look like a bottle opener. We all know what bottle openers look like. But somebody decided to make a Klein bottle opener. It's a bit of a pun. It's a bit of a silly pun, but it's also a very, smart mathematical pun. Yeah, that's Bathsheba's, exactly. But it's a Klein bottle opener, and she's a mathematical artist, right? And so she's come up with all these really, from a mathematical perspective, a very different approach to things. So I'm just going to close all of this up by saying thanks, everyone, and I'll jump to questions in just a second, but thanks everyone for jumping in here and sharing all the fantastic links. I hope everyone's enjoyed those. I will encourage you to do 3 things. One is to go to check out a design museum and look into the history of design. As people who do 3D printing and additive manufacturing, you're going to look at everything so differently once you see things in the context of the history of design. Second thing is get your hands dirty and just like make something with your hands. You'll have a fantastic, it's just something good to do every once in a while, especially if you're used to working with Oh, especially if you're used to working with machines all the time. And the third is it's still the early days of additive. We are so far from hitting our stride. So don't hold back. Take a bunch of chances. And I'm going to keep on tracking this space, and I'd absolutely love to highlight some of the work that you do in the future. So thank you all so much for being here. Let me see if there are any questions, and Trish, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so thanks. That was really, really inspiring, Liz. So we've got a question from Matt, and he's asked, for some of Jeff Kuhn's work, I love Jeff Kuhn's, by the way, the fab tools were insufficient to meet the goals for the projects. So his team designed new tools and pushed tools further. Are you seeing things like this happen in additive manufacturing?
Absolutely. The one that I know about is actually MX3D, and Jors Larman was the designer who was behind a lot of the early technology that came out of that company, and that company spun off from his design lab. Let me just type in his name. I think that's how you spell it. I'm just going to add it as ask. That's not it. I'll put that there. Anyway, that's actually one of the folks, and all of that led to hang on, I'm going to get, for instance, the technology that was able to produce this particular sculpture that came from his lab. And of course, he's more of a designer, and he's not somebody who wants to build and manage and sell machines. And so he's maintained his design lab, and he actually has a lot of pieces in a number of museums around the world.
Yeah, and that's one of the trends that I've found as well. Like I've got a designer background myself, and like you, I don't have additive manufacturing engineering experience. But what I've learned and what I've seen our team do, and what the MX3D team and yours and a lot of the additive manufacturing businesses have come to realize, is you've got to think outside the box when it comes to additive manufacturing. Like the same design principles might not necessarily apply. So you have to work with the way that the technology outputs. So that's just something that I found personally. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask Liz? Yeah, no. Okay. What other trends are you seeing within additive manufacturing? We've got 1 minute left, so.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I am seeing a lot of people who are not just additive manufacturing engineers or hardcore, I'm going to say, metallurgists or designers coming into this space, and really through some of these design bureaus, whether it's, just trying out a couple of different technologies and really kind of figuring out what works for them. And then finding other people and really collaborating in neat new ways. I think finding other people who are like-minded and really enjoy the kind of things that you're making is a wonderful thing to do. Excellent. And keep sharing, just everyone's sharing this neat stuff, and people, there's a lot of good energy there. And it's important that people like what they do and have some, there's some novel joy to it as well. And just appreciating other people's work, I think, is a big part of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's an exciting industry to work in, and it's such an emerging technology. So I just want to quickly thank you, and we will be moving on to our next speaker. And our next speaker, if I can ask her to come on stage, is